If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. People, have you had any scary encounters with duendes, gnomes, folklore creatures, humanoids, dogman, Bigfoot, etc., and the like? If so, share your stories. When I was a kid, we would get together with my cousins a few times a year. They would either come stay with us for a few days or we would stay at their house for a few days. My oldest cousin is a year older than me, and my other cousin is a year younger. The gnome story took place at their house. I can't remember exactly how old I was at the time, but somewhere between 4-6-ish. So me and my older cousin were sleeping in her room when I was awakened by whispering. She had a nightlight next to her dollhouse, so I could see a little bit in her room. When I looked around to see where the whispering was coming from, I saw what looked like gnomes. I was absolutely terrified and woke my cousin up to tell her. She told me to just ignore them and not even look at them, and then she went back to sleep. I was scared out of my mind and hid under the blanket until the sun came up. I asked her about them again the next day. She told me that she only sees them once in a while, but my other cousin sees them frequently. Weirdly, I don't think we ever really talked about them again, but I definitely remember being afraid at their house at night. I absolutely would not use the bathroom during the night there because I was so afraid of seeing them again. I know most people aren't going to believe this story, and that's okay. I wouldn't have believed it myself had I not seen them. Believe me or not, but I definitely know what I saw. One day during my summer holidays, me and a few friends decided to go play by an old bridge, and one of my mates decided to have a race. I lost, but when I got back to my other mates, they were pale as a sheet, and when biased, one of them said one word, Rake. When I asked, however, it would not be long before the serene Americana-esque morning was disrupted by the sounds of screaming. Asa suddenly heard the frantic screams of the children, as well as the panicked barking of the dog, and his wife apparently crying for resistance. Fearing for the safety of his family, Grundy made a beeline to the source of the uproar, the edge of a cornfield, where he almost immediately came face to face with the entity about which he had presumably been hearing stories for weeks prior. He described the creature as having a face comparable to that of a wanderoo, presumably a lion-tailed macaque, adorned with a long snowy beard or mane. Its body resembled that of a baboon, while its feet and legs were almost identical to those of a human from the knees down. It was said to be roughly 5 feet in height, while its chest would apparently eclipse the Cardiff giant in terms of volume. Much to Ace's everlasting horror, the monster in question was carrying the 2 children, Oni in each paw and beating a swift retreat into the nearby forest. Seemingly startled at the sudden approach of Mr. Grundy, the ape-man briefly halted and partially turned to adjust its direction of travel before being struck by a well-directed blow and collapsing to the ground. The children were able to escape without injury during this process. However, before the seemingly incapacitated creature could be secured and shipped off to P.T. Barnum's circus, as the author of the newspaper article seems to be extremely sure it should be, it leapt from the ground with lightning rapidity and bolted into the forest. Although the woods for miles around were promptly and thoroughly searched, no trace of the entity's whereabouts could be obtained. The article finishes by saying that fear and excitement are growing in the region of the country in question and even implores young men fond of adventure to congregate into groups and set out into the forest with the aim of securing this creature so that it can be captured and rendered harmless. Okay, so my friends and I frequent a park in Shawnee, Ks. It's right on the Kansas River, and we go there quite often. There have been a couple nights where we've seen small human-like creatures that are very pale white, have bright yellow eyes, and tend to stand behind or in trees, swaying their bodies back and forth like an upside-down pendulum. They almost remind me of the Falmer from Skyrim. I've had a couple buddies say that they've seen them too. A couple farmers in the area say they've seen their eyes bobbing back and forth from a distance without needing any source of light to cause them to glow, and the one thing that every story has in common, including my own, is that they can move so fast that they almost look like lightning, shooting across the tree line. One farmer even claimed that he saw one clear a half-mile gap in the blink of an eye. I've seen them a few times, but in all of my experiences, they've stood about 4 feet 9 inches, been incredibly docile and skittish, and generally only appeared on foggy nights. Besides the fog, they don't seem to match up to any popular stories I've ever heard about skinwalkers, Wendigo, or Rakes, but the similarities in appearance, besides size, match up perfectly. This story actually happened to my sister. It took place a few years ago. My sister, Kat, was staying the night at her ex-friend's house with some others. Kat and one of her ex-friends, for the purposes of the story, we will call them Mary, went outside at around midnight. They were the only ones awake. They were just walking around the front lawn when Kat saw something out of the corner of her eye. It was standing under a street light, across the street, and slowly walking towards them. Kat said it looked like a crossover of the Slender Man and the Rake. It was about as tall as the streetlight, but it was hunched over a bit. It was a black color with black fur patches and a white deer skull-like face. She asked if Mary had seen it, and Mary said she had. They looked away, then back at the creature. When they looked back at it, it was now sprinting towards them. They ran inside and shut the door. They didn't leave the house until that morning. Now when Kat told me this story, I said it might be a seed-eater or a skinwalker. She said that she had looked into it being a skinwalker mid-change, but it was too y'all to be a skinwalker. As for the seed-eater, I said it because of the fur in the face. She said its face resembled a seed-eater's, but it was too tall. Then we brought up the possibility of the Wendigo because of the length and thinness of the creature, but we discarded it. Kat had also said that her ex-friend, Georgia, the one whose house they were at, had said that it could have been some Native American folklore, but Kat couldn't remember what the name of it was. Well, almost 2 years ago, I was home from college visiting my parents, and my dad and I were going to see a movie while my mom got some time to herself. I don't remember much else about the day, but a black dog showed up at the house and upset our cats. Our house cat and the stray my parents let in and feed and love like their own, because my mom is an animal person, so she likes to play with any cats or dogs that come our way. So this dog shows up, wants to come in, and won't go away. We didn't want to let him in because both cats had full-on fluffed tails raised back, hissing like no tomorrow. It was normal for our house cat, but the stray was normally pretty laid back. Eventually, my mom can't stand it, she wants to play with the dog, so she tries to go outside, but it rushes in. Jet Black was not a huge dog but pretty sizable, I don't know the breed, and he was so friendly and playful. At this point, both cats retreated to the back of the house, which was odd because the house cat accepted the stray but was still territorial toward the back of the house. So my mom played and fed the dog, and it went on its way. My dad and I went to go see the movie, and halfway through, we got a call that my mom's sister had passed. It didn't dawn on me till a week later that I remembered tales of black dogs being omens of imminent death, and the more I looked into it, the more freaked out I was. Because this dog seemed real, felt real, and smelled real. Nothing like any of my other experiences. It was like a real dog that I could pet and feel. I still can't really decide how I feel about it. Was the dog an omen or a coincidence? Some years ago, I was sitting in my living room alone, just scrolling through the internet. All of a sudden, without any warning, a creature appeared in front of me. I could see it clearly with my third eye, more clearly than I've ever seen anything. It was roughly 4, grayish-white skin, hunched over, skinny and bony, with a bulbous head. It had very little hair on its head to speak of, basically just a few wisps. Its eyes were white and fogged over, and its mouth was the most terrifying thing. It was mostly toothless, hanging loosely open, but connecting the upper jaw to the lower jaw were strings of flesh, for lack of a better word. It was like its flesh had melted and reconnected on the lower jaw, I guess. It was absolutely horrific, and it made a weird clicking sound. It stared at me as I tried to avoid its gaze. At first it was about 3 feet away, then suddenly it glitched to be only maybe a foot from my face. It tilted its head back and forth for a solid minute at least, then vanished. After that, I lost my psychic sight and abilities for weeks. I don't know whether that's what it's doing or just plain fear, but it was scary. The closest visual example I can give is if you mixed Gollum with the siren from the Supernatural. To be honest, I hadn't ever watched Supernatural or Lord of the Rings until way later. Any ideas about what I saw? Or what was its purpose? A water baby is a spirit, a ghoul, or a monster. Most of them agree, however, that a water baby is a Native American-bred urban legend of small childlike creatures living in the waters of reservations around the western United States. This small creature has some specific characteristics that are sometimes conflicting in essence. Water babies, according to Native American lore, can be found at Massacre Rock State Park in Idaho and in Utah Lake, though one origin story is distinctly more upsetting. The Idaho water babies are believed to be the ghosts of young children that the starving people of the Shoshone tribe drowned in the river, choosing this death over one of starvation. It's said that if you sit on the rocks, you can still hear their cries. While some stories claim that the babies simply drowned, others posit that they adapted, grew gills, and have sworn revenge on the living. In Utah, water babies are believed to be another type of creature altogether. According to Weird US, these water babies were a type of dwarf that lived in the lake and mimicked the sounds of babies crying to drown unsuspecting people. Different water baby legends can be found in Nevada and California, as well. The commonality between them all seems to be luring people into the lake to drown them. I was born, and my mom lived in Mexico when she was pregnant with me. One night, she encountered little people in the house, and she was frightened, and she pretended to be asleep. And she told me that after I asked her if she saw anything paranormal, and then that made my curiosity grow, and I started to look into the paranormal. I've always been told that if you have that mindset and put yourself in that atmosphere, it will draw itself to you. So one morning around 4 a.m., I was leaving my girlfriend's house to go back home because me and my mom work at a factory together. I live in Kentucky. I was driving home, and I noticed a little creature on the road that looked more like a goblin. Its scaly skin had a tail that was about 2 feet tall and a thin build. It ran across the road and into the ditch. I stopped when I first saw it. I just knew what it was or had an idea of what it was. When I got home, I told my mom. My mom is the religious type, so she told me she warned me not to seek out the paranormal. Here in North Texas, a cryptid known as the Lake Worth Monster or the Greer Island Goatman is said to roam Greer Island and the surrounding area near Lake Worth. Although this story doesn't take place at the lake, it takes place at another nearby lake. I'm not going to share this specific lake for privacy reasons. Anyway, when we were kids, my cousin, 8 males, lived by this lake. My sister, 10 female, and I, 12 male, as well as his other cousin, 13 male, were invited over for the weekend. When we were over, we heard strange noises during the night, similar to an elk bugle. This was the loudest when my uncle drove us through the woodland on the shore. One night, while staying up playing Animal Crossing, about 2012, New Leaf had just released, we heard these noises and looked out the window to see a gray, hairy humanoid figure with horns and hooves standing on his neighbor's roof. Needless to say, this was the most terrifying place I had ever been. After this, we just hid in his room, closed all windows and blinds, and made a fort so we felt safer. We didn't get our aunt and uncle, though, because he had a baby brother that we did not want to disturb. After all, we thought the crying would attract it. Okay, so I know how unbelievable this is. But I swear this happened to my friend and me. Maybe you guys could help me figure out what we really saw. So my friend and I lived in a quiet neighborhood. One evening, we were hanging out, sitting on the sidewalk under a street lamp, talking. We saw this huge dog-like creature walking on all fours up the street, in our direction but not towards us. At first, we really didn't think anything of it. But the closer it came into our view, the clearer we got to see it. It almost looked like a baboon. Yes, I know how silly that sounds, but I went to China once and saw one in person, with dark brown hair all over it, but it wasn't overly hairy, had extremely long limbs, and was so thin you could almost see its rib cage. I guess it felt like we were looking at a 6-7 foot man who had been starved for years walking on all fours. It walked towards this big tree a couple feet away from us and jumped into it. At that moment, my friend and I, stupidly, decided to run up to the tree and try to see what that was. We did some research later on and typed the description online, and it said it was a devil monkey. What do you think? So a year ago, me and a friend were coming back from going swimming in a town called Ridgeson. My friend lives in a little town called Holton. As we were cycling along, my friend's tire collapsed, so we tried fixing it. Suddenly, a howl erupted from the woods, and with me binge-watching nature documentaries and knowing a bit about animals, I couldn't place it. It was incredibly deep, and the entire woods went silent. We worked harder and harder, with one of us looking over the woods we were in. After a while, I saw it, 2 red eyes and pointy ears behind a brush around 50 meters from us. As we bolted, we decided to come back today. It really scared us when we came back and saw that the bush it was looking over was as tall as me. I was 5 feet 3 inches at the time. The beast I saw was a cardo, a hellhound. A deputy sheriff responded to a call from a teen girl in a house in a rural area of the county he was working in. Her parents were in town, it was night, and she was having a sleepover. There were several teenage girls alone in the 2-story house. The girl told the 911 operator that someone was upstairs tearing up the house. The responding officer went up to investigate. I saw a big, hairy biped trashing a room. It dashed to an adjoining room and fled through a window. He said it looked mean and had red eyes. He took the girls out to his patrol vehicle and went in foot pursuit of the animal. He could hear it running and growling through the woods. He soon realized it had led him into an open area he was not comfortable with, and he had told no one of his location. He went back to his vehicle. The parents arrived while he was interviewing the girls. He returned the following day with another deputy. Upon inspection of the side of the house, he noted huge gouges taken out of the siding where the animal had climbed up to the 2nd floor to gain entry through a window. He walked toward the woods and could feel it watching him. It also became vocal, as if it were trying to lure him into the woods. He left, and he never heard any more reports from that family. This story was on a television show about haunted woods or something. I don't remember exactly the name of the show. It's been several years since I've seen it. I hope I recalled it accurately enough. Sasquatch Chronicles 593, Terror on the Job Site. I found the guy pretty convincing. He is just going through it as he's telling the story. His terror is palpable, and the story is good. Basically, he and some other drillers of some sort are way up in the mountains in California on a project, and one day they think they hear a cougar up a cliff in the woods, and he shoots a crossbow at it. The next day, he's there alone, and several Sasquatchers harass him pretty badly. His description of the big one is terrifying. More personally, I've always been on the fence about dogman encounters because they seem to be the new thing and even less possible than Sasquatch. Though I am from Wisconsin, I actually have two stories from before I knew about the dogman. The first story is that my friend was at an engagement party at a rural bar, and there was a middle-aged couple that said goodbye to everyone and left. They never made it home, and their bodies were found mangled in a field 3 days later. This happened near Jefferson, Wisconsin, close to the location of Bray Road. I could never find a report or article about this, so I take it with a grain of salt. The second story and most personal is as follows, but disclaimer, I am not of the local native people but grew up with them as it is a small town. We have several native holy sites in our town, and one of them, as told to me by my close native friend, and also the smartest woman I know, has always been protected by what they call the dog people. She hated telling the stories and would sometimes stop, as white men were not supposed to hear them, and the whole thing scared her. There were stories of dog track lines that would disappear and missing security guards, along with the constant feeling of being watched while inside the canyon. I have also heard barking from the nearby woods at night, though the place was miles from the nearest house. You kind of had to be there. But the place is off limits to the public. I learned about these dog people long before I had heard of the Beast of Bray Road. Any of the 1960 Mothman encounters, particularly Marcella Bennett's encounter with the Mothman. Bennett was the focus of the often repeated Mothman incident of November 16, 1966. This is frequently called the second sighting of Mothman, with the Scarberry and Millette sighting the night before being called the first, even though today we know there were earlier encounters. On November 16, 1966, rumors circulated that several armed local residents combed the area around the TNT plant for signs of Mothman. Then, at about 9 p.m., on November 16, 1966, Raymond Walmsley, 19, his wife Kathy Walmsley, 18, and Marcella Bennett, 21, carrying her infant daughter Tina, sometimes written as Tina by the media, along with other family members, were finished visiting the Ralph Thomas family and returning to their car. Mr. and Mrs. Ralph Thomas lived in a bungalow among the igloos, concrete dome-shaped dynamite storage structures erected during World War I, near the TNT plant. The igloos were now empty, some owned by the county, others by companies intending to use them for storage. It was when the Walmsleys Bennetts were leaving that they disturbed something on the Thomas property along White Church Road. The figure appeared behind their parked vehicle and reportedly, in some accounts, then went on the Thomases' porch and roof. It rose slowly from the ground. A big, gray thing. Bigger than a man, with terrible, glowing, red eyes, reported Marcella Bennett, who screamed and panic-strickenly dropped her baby and fell to the ground in shock. The incident is famous for the fact that when Bennett saw it, she was so startled that she fell on her baby. Bennett's remark about Mothman's terrible, glowing, red eyes is a frequently quoted description. As the thing unfurled its huge wings, Raymond Walmsley snatched up the child and herded the witnesses back to the safety of the house, where they were led in by Ricky Thomas, 15, and sisters Connie and Vicky. While Walmsley went to call the police, the creature seemed to have shuffled along behind the group, coming onto the porch and peering in at them through the window. The unknown bird-like animal vanished by the time the police arrived. Marcella Bennett was so traumatized that she eventually sought medical attention. They honestly shared their encounter with local authorities and news people, as they wished to warn others. I'm Indonesian, and I have a second-hand account story to tell you. My grandpa was born in Sumatra. Even though his dad is a Chinese immigrant, my grandpa pretty much lived there for his whole life. You see, the island of Sumatra has many thick and dense forests, and if I remember correctly, there are many parts still left unexplored. My grandpa was quite adventurous when he was younger. He often went to the forest with his friends to hunt squirrels and other small wild animals. One day, my grandpa and his friends decided to go to another region in Sumatra and hunt in a more remote and unfamiliar forest. He said he got bored hunting in the same forest all the time. So, accompanied by his usual hunting friends, they hired a local guide and entered the forest. After hunting for squirrels all day, they realized that they were lost. Their local guide said he'd never seen that part of the forest they were in, which was weird because he made sure to stay in the area he was familiar with. My grandpa said it felt like they were hypnotized by unseen forces, and before they knew it, they ended up in an unfamiliar part of the forest. They tried to remain calm and assess the situation, and that's when they noticed it. Something was observing them from behind the bush. My grandpa said it looked like a hybrid between humans and chimpanzees, and it was kind of small, about as tall as an adult's waist. He couldn't explain it well because of how weird that thing was. But he remembers one particular detail about the creature, or thing. Its front foot was in reverse position, so when the creature walked, it looked like the creature was walking backwards. The creature noticed my grandpa's party was aware of its presence and walked away from the scene. Strangely enough, the creature wasn't running at all, so out of curiosity, the party decided to follow the creature. They arrived at an open area where a herd of creatures gathered. My grandpa said they were talking some kind of unknown language, like a wildman language. The party decided there was enough curiosity and time to scram out of there because they were in an unknown situation and they could be in real danger. After walking for hours, they miraculously reached the edge of the forest some time after sunrise, and luckily enough, the creatures didn't follow them at all. It's up to you guys to believe me or not, but one thing I know for sure is that my grandpa wasn't a liar. He kept telling us this story even after he reached a very old age. One thing that I want to mention is that the creatures speak some kind of unknown language. That's why the very first time I heard the Sierra sound, I got shivers all over my body. To think these creatures are intelligent is very exciting. Something I saw in 1999 on the countryside of the Dominican Republic. It was when I was visiting my family's land when I was 12 years old. They have lived in a remote place for generations. Difficult terrain. A lot of acres, one dirt road, and a lot of incest because no one is around for miles and people barely leave to seek wives, until some of my father's generation moved to the capital and broke the pattern. There are no stores, hospitals, or schools, there are just farms, forests, mountains, and rivers nearby. I saw some humanoid ape creature late at night perched on a tree in an odd position while on a night walk with my cousin. It was jet black, blacker than the night. About 4 to 5 feet if he stood up. It just stared with glowing red eyes. From what I could make out against the moonlight, it had the shape of a small man, one foot sticking out in an unnatural way, and a furry monkey head. I can tell it was covered in black fur. My cousin and I ran so fast after staring at it for 5 seconds. There are no primates in the Dominican Republic. Also, earlier that day, we went exploring and went up a mountain, then ventured into a meadow full of wind turbines that, according to the adults, did not exist either. I've only visited that town or village twice in my life, and it still creeps me out. I was 16 in northern Florida. My grandpa lived on roughly 3 acres, surrounded by thick forest. His trailer was in the middle. I snuck out one night to have a cigarette. I'm sitting on the stairs, and I hear a bipedal walking out at the tree line. Granted, there are hunters that use the woods, but this is 10 p.m. All of a sudden, all the frogs and crickets went quiet. I heard something clear in the brush. Standing on the edge of the forest, I could make out a humanoid, I want to say 8 feet tall. I could see the silhouette and 2 eyes illuminated by a street light nearby. I froze and went into a fight or flight response. Slowly, I got up and tossed my cigarette. It watched me the whole time. Finally, I grabbed the doorknob behind me, never turning away, and backed into the trailer. Locked the doors and shut the blinds. One of the more terrifying moments of my life. So when I was maybe 7 or 6, I remember people talking a lot about Bigfoot, and I was never scared of Bigfoot, and I didn't think much of it, but I knew about him, and I didn't necessarily believe anything in cryptids. Heck, I didn't know what they were, I just had heard of Bigfoot. So I ended up going camping with my family, and we brought a car and a trailer with us so we could sleep in the trailer overnight, and we brought food and snacks. I remember being by the campfire with my family, and I was just getting this feeling like I was being watched, and you know how it is when it is dark in the woods and you are by the campfire, it tends to feel like eerie. Plus, I was 6, so you know how you imagine things, so I was trying to ignore it as I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. I didn't say anything to my family because I didn't want to seem like a scaredy cat, as they didn't seem to notice. I just went to the trailer and went to bed for the night, and everything was fine until the next morning, when Eileen woke up to find a handprint on the hind, but I couldn't tell what it was. It didn't appear to have arms, or if it did, it was keeping them straight down at its side. And the head seemed abnormally small for its size and height. What was especially weird is that it never seemed to get any closer or farther away, even though it was moving fairly rapidly. I would occasionally lose sight of it, even though it was always in the middle of the street, but if I glanced away or blinked, it would take me a half second to focus on it again. There were no other cars or people around. I zoomed away as soon as the light turned on. Thoughts? This story happened a few years ago, and I'll recount it as accurately as I can. So a few years ago, myself and my bandmates played a show in northeastern Kansas. If you're familiar with the area, you might be aware of a certain purple-colored cat mascot in the college town we played in. We drove back to our homes in Kansas City and chose to take the back roads and state highways instead of traveling further south to the interstate highway. As we're driving in a relatively remote area of Kansas, we were driving along a cornfield, which took up the entire left side of the highway for several miles. I was driving, my bassist was in the passenger seat, and our singer was in the back distracted by his phone, who didn't see anything. As we're driving along, my bassist and I suddenly see something on the cornfield to our left, a huge figure, at least 7 to 8 feet tall, suddenly darting into the cornfield on our left just as my headlights revealed it. If you've seen the movie Signs, starring M. Night Shyamalan, you're familiar with the scene where he shines his flashlight and briefly sees a leg of an alien creature suddenly retreating into the cornfield. It was exactly like that. We saw a towering figure suddenly dart into the cornfield, turning as if it had just realized it had been noticed. The figure, as far as I remember, stood at least 7 to 8 feet tall, and from the brief glimpse we caught of it, it appeared to be covered in feathers, similar to an owl-like creature. I distinctly remember myself and my bassist exclaiming loudly to each other, "Did you just see that?" as we passed by. We didn't stop to investigate because 1, it was close to 1 in the morning and we wanted to get home, and 2, duck confronting that thing. Has anyone heard of similar stories in the area? I'm fully ready and willing to admit we may have seen something totally plausible, including the fact that my memory may not be as accurate as I remember it being, or that we may have just misidentified a regular human being somehow, but I just thought I'd ask in case there was any such folklore of a feathered humanoid creature in the area. My fiancé, who experienced this a few years before we met. He was out at night walking our dog, his at the time, in his parents' neighborhood in southeast Louisiana, where we're from. It was dark, and on his parents' street, there's only 2 street lamps, one at an intersection about a half block down from their house, and another at the end of the street, another few blocks down. He got as far as the first lamp before he saw something, down the street hunched over, digging in the neighbor's garbage cans under the next light. He thinks it may have been furry, but he said the color was dark, like black, dark gray, or brown. He stopped with the dog. This thing noticed them under the street light and straightened up. He said suddenly it was between 7 and 8 feet tall, and its legs were bending in the opposite direction human legs bend at the knee. Its arms were long, lean, and bent up in front of it, kind of like a T-Rex. It started coming towards them at a slow pace, so my fiancé noped and turned around to go back to the house. He looked behind him and it had sped up, so he sped up, and finally it was full on running at a lean, and so he took off, running back to the house, basically dragging the poor dog behind him, and he could hear whatever it was pounding pavement behind them. He jumped the ditch, ran through the yard, and went into the house. He said that some time after that, he noticed very large, very inhuman footprints in the yard, literally right off the concrete path that leads up to their front door. A few nights later, he went out to smoke around 3 or 4 in the morning, and there were more footprints on the concrete directly outside the door. Like this thing was just standing there looking in the giant window in the front door. Also, this was around the same time that summer when a lot of pets were going missing in the area, like you couldn't go a block without seeing missing posters plastered everywhere. We have no idea what this thing was, and he never saw it again after that, and animals stopped going missing shortly after. We've talked about it a bunch of times and have been trying to figure it out for years. Maybe someone here can hazard a guess. So when I was young, I lived on a farm with my family that had some pretty freaky urban legends attached to it. Even to the point that a lot of my indigenous family refused to visit out of fear. The story goes that there was an evil creature that lived at the bottom of the hill and came out at night to torment and play tricks on people. I never believed in that stuff even as a kid, but one night I started having vivid, almost real feeling nightmares about being chased by it around the property that got so bad it ended up putting me in therapy. After a year of being haunted by this thing, I tried to tell my family that I wanted to move because of how real these nightmares were, but they just thought I had a wild imagination. It wasn't only the nightmares that made this so horrifying, though. Some days, we'd find ravaged chickens, and other days, goats would go missing. I'd have friends stay over and never come back, and sometimes late at night we'd hear something chasing our horse in the field, and she would go crazy and scream into the early hours of the morning. My sister and I started to believe that this thing was very real. One day, a friend of the family came to visit and stayed in the cabin down the back of the property, which was the first night I'd managed to get proper sleep in months. That night, a friend of my parents had the worst nightmares he'd ever had. He left early the next day and never came to visit again. He said as he was packing that something was chasing him in his dreams, and when he woke, he heard muffled crying outside the cabin, and it was shaking as if something was hitting the side of the building with full force. The look of fear on that man's face still haunts me to this day. The man was shaking and crying as he drove away, and my parents refused to talk with us about it. Later on that day, my sister and I walked down to the cabin to find it was on a lean, and the inside looked like it had been hit by an earthquake. My parents sold the farm and moved away a couple of months after that. I never had those nightmares again. A few years later, my siblings and I were sent an article about the farm and a murder-suicide that happened after the husband who bought the property went insane, stabbed his wife to death, and then shot himself in the head. My parents refused to talk about it, but sometimes my siblings and cousins bring it up in conversation, sharing the trauma it caused us and our friends who refused to come back after the horrible night terrors they experienced there. That entire town is ducked. Everyone that leaves that township has a traumatizing story that is either logic-based or supernatural. So many terrible things have happened there, so I wouldn't be surprised if there's something more sinister living on that land. If you want to go down a depressing wormhole, look up the Bowerville murders. It's our very own little Australian version of Derry. I'm not sure if the whole thing was in my mind or a real horror story, but after finding out about the murder that happened a couple of years later, I'm starting to believe that thing is still there, entering people's nightmares, butchering the local wildlife, and terrorizing anyone who ever buys up that land. Duck. That was traumatic to write. So this was in 2017. I was in the church at the time, and we did the Pioneer Trail because my mom convinced me to do it even though I wasn't thrilled. I had an easy feeling, and I didn't know why until after the first night. I will get to that later. So we're walking on the Pioneer Trail for about 10 miles. At this point, we stop for a break. I eat like everyone else, but I can't shake the feeling that something is watching. I decided not to say anything because I was like, that's stupid, there's nothing here besides us. So I thought we were to proceed with our normal activities, and I had eaten Takis that night, spicy chips, and I had to go to the bathroom, which I did, and then I went back to the cabin after a long day of activities, ready to go to sleep. However, before I fell asleep, I heard a branch snap. I didn't think much of it, but then I heard another and another and another, and then I thought, alright, something's up, so I decided to look outside the window to see what was out there, and when I saw a shock to my core, I saw this long, white link creature skinny, you could see the rib cage and red burning eyes, and it looked human but wrong. Its skin was mainly a translucent white, and it was sniffing. It looked like she was sniffing around in the forest, looking for something. I stared at it for a bit, watching it sniff the course, and its back turned to me. However, it started turning its body slowly in the direction where I was looking, and I quickly went back to my bunk with so many Salzmans from what the hell is this thing? Am I going crazy? And of course, while I'm thinking these thoughts, I could hear more branches breaking, but I decided not to put my head back at the window. However, I woke up one of my cabin mates, and he looked at me so long that I had a terrified look on my face. He said, "You good, Leo, you saw a ghost," and he gave me a little chuckle. I told him, I don't know what I saw, but I want you to look with me." He said, "Okay, but you know there's nothing out there, Rig." As we looked out the window, it was still there. It looked a bit closer than before. Thankfully, it wasn't facing us over, so we decided to duck our heads back in and try to sleep. Then I could hear tons of branches breaking again, but we decided not to look, and we closed the window blinds at this point. After about 30 minutes, I opened them again, and they were gone. All that was left was a ton of broken branches. We didn't know what to do, but we fell back asleep, of course, and we decided not to tell our counselors exactly what it was. We told them we thought we heard a bear or something in the night, and they sent a group out to investigate, but they couldn't find anything besides a few odd paw prints. They put me in my cabinet, and I knew what it was. Since then, I haven't gone back to the Pioneer Trail. I'm Costa Rican, and this folklore is heavily instilled in children so they don't go running off to become duendes with the forest folk. Last time I visited the country, I was sleeping on the floor and was awoken calmly in the middle of the night. At the end of the bed, there was this shadow figure, 2 feet tall, stocky, and robust, just watching me sleep. I didn't feel disturbed or even offended. I felt well guarded and watched over, so I went back to bed without a second thought. I even invited the duende to stay as long as they'd like. When I awoke, my dad told me, who was sleeping in the living room over, that he had woken up in the middle of the night, and the back patio door, in his field of vision from the couch, had opened slowly during the middle of the night, and he heard something come in. Emotionally, he responded the same way and just went back to sleep. As if the creature had a connection, relationship, or responsibility to be there. At a heart-based level, neither one of us questioned why or how it was there. Later in the trip, we walked around the rainforest, and I swore a fae had called to me telepathically. I turned to look, and my eyes were drawn to a tree. It had a hole in its stump and very obviously looked like a den. There were grass strands right in front of it, fluttering. Yet no wind. I knew it was the fae, and I came up right to its door, said hello and thank you, then went on my way. This was 5 years ago. Fast forward to 2018. I lived in Northern California, Chile. My apartment was infested with fae. It was previously rented by older women who had passed away. They fed the alley cats and would always have them over. It held that aura once I moved in. I tried cleansing it, but lo and behold, those spirits were strong and in love with the home, so we lived mutually. In my shower, I constantly saw fluttering lights dancing around with me. I eventually began offering the fae anything I could to appease them, simply because they can make the space very buzzy and electric, sometimes an overwhelming feeling. Milk, honey, rum, chocolate, bread, mints, sweets, flowers, stones, and kind words and affirmations were my go-to offerings. I set up a little home for them and would light candles every night to symbolize the warmth and welcome I was extending. They are certainly mischievous and can be emotionally flustered, what people say is their angry or vengeful side. It seems gnomes and fae work together, they live in the same medium and communicate with humans in the same way. Gnomes mind their own business for the most part. Maybe you've got a case of fairies on your hands. What are they taking? Where do you live that would enhance their lucidity in this reality? Body of water, mountains, vortex space such as a crowded apartment, haunted/spirit-bound space, or very rural area. Have you tried speaking to them when they're not messing with your things? They're trying to get your attention. Captain William Clark of the Lewis and Clark expedition recorded an account of a race of small humanoids living in the vicinity of present-day Vermilion, South Dakota. Here is the actual entry in Clark's journal. 24th of August, Friday, 1804. In my absence, the boat passed a small river called the Indian White Stone River. This river is about 30 yards wide and runs through a plain and prairie in its whole course. In a northerly direction from the mouth of this creek in an impending plain, a high hill is situated and appears to have a conic form, and by the different nations of Indians in this quarter, it is supposed to be the residence of devils. That they are in human form with remarkable large heads and about 18 inches high, that they are very watchful and are armed with sharp arrows with which they can kill at a great distance. They are said to kill all persons who are so hardy as to attempt to approach the hill. They state that tradition informs them that many Indians have suffered by those little people, and among others, 3 Mahar men fell a sacrifice to their merciless fury not many years ago. So much do the Maha, Suis, Ottos, and other neighboring nations believe this fable that no consideration is sufficient to induce them to approach the hill. I went to the Cosmic Campground in southwestern New Mexico, famous for being an international dark sky sanctuary. The night sky is incredibly dark and excellent for telescopes or even the naked eye. I camped overnight, away from the main telescope pads and facilities, for 2 nights. I slept in an average tent with my boyfriend and our large dog. After hours of stargazing, and a UFO sighting, we finally were able to sleep. It was likely between 3 and 3:30 a.m. when I was jolted awake. I felt something outside my tent. My dog woke up as well, growling. We saw a glow from outside the tent, which caused him to stand up, his posture very alert. I nudged my boyfriend awake, who seemed freaked out, but he missed the glow that my dog and I saw. I absolutely know I wasn't dreaming. I sensed something outside, as did my dog. We were all too terrified to exit the tent, and we stayed awake for probably another 3 hours until the sun started to rise. Any insight would be appreciated. Unfortunately, I can't say this is a true humanoid encounter, since all I encountered was fear and a glowing light, or not. The deer creature. I had just picked up my friend from his house. We both snuck out that night from our parents' places to go and smoke. We used to go to this lot and hang out with the stray cats, feed them, listen to music, and look at the stars. This night, we did some reading with tarot cards. My friend was trying to show me how to read tarot. We did a couple of spreads and talked about Wicca before we started to hear noises. My friend was a little high, and I was sober at the time because we were going to be doing a lot of driving that night, so I decided not to smoke. We knew that there were cats around, but these noises weren't from stray cats. In fact, it was like people were running around us in circles. My friend panicked and asked me if I could hear it too. I tried to stay as calm and quiet as possible, and I just nodded and tried to whisper to him. Stay quiet, remember, We are in a sensitive area, and we don't know if we are surrounded by people. He thought for a minute before grabbing onto my sweatshirt. We sat there, looking around, as we slowly cleaned up our things and picked them up. Stand up slowly and walk to the car. Hold this in your hand, and you will throw it if someone runs at us, my friend whispered, handing me a metal bottle. We both got up, slowly went to the car, and got in safely. Looking around while I was pulling out of our parking spot, I realized that there was no place for anyone to hide if they were surrounding us. We pulled out and decided to go for a drive. We drove to the neighboring town, where my grandma lives. We started to get hungry, and so we started to look for a jack-in-the-box. As we drove, a car started following us. I quickly recognized that it was a cop car. We pulled into the wrong lot and tried a different fast food place because we couldn't find the jack-in-the-box. The cop hid in the neighboring lot and followed us when we left. He followed us for miles until we got back on the main road. As we drove down this road, my friend started to panic. For some background, my friend is a practicing witch. When he says he experiences a feeling, I trust him, but tonight scared me. "Don't turn there," he said to me monotonously. I looked over at him, but I could see the panic on his face. "Why, what's wrong?" I asked him. "We are going to die, that street is giving me a really bad vibe." I turned away from it and continued straight till we got on the highway. To distract him, we talked about bands. I talked about the band I used to be in, while he talked about his dream band. We laughed the whole way back. Once we got back into my friend's town, we got to the street that goes down into the wooded area where his house is. We are now 4 miles away from his home. The streets were dark, as there were no street lights, just the lights from the houses. As we pulled onto the last street, both of us were quiet. The sides of the streets are adorned with trees. As we turned and started driving ahead, a creature ran across the road. It looked like a deer but was human. It took only 2 steps across the street before it was gone. Its legs were long, and it itself was tall. About 8.5 feet, counting the antlers. Its eyes glowed white for the split second we saw it. As soon as it appeared, it was gone. Before I could panic or say anything, my friend said, "I know we both saw that, but we're not going to talk about it. Do not say it, don't acknowledge it," he said to me sternly. I agreed, and ever since we haven't spoken about it, but we both agreed when it was far away that it could have been a skinwalker. We are still unsure of what this could be, and honestly, if someone could help me out, that creature haunts me to this day. One night around 1:45 a.m., me and my 3 friends decided to go for a bike ride. The ride we took was over 2 miles. About half a mile into the ride, me and one of my friends, friend 3, start hearing howls. My friend looks at me and says it's just coyotes. I believed him because my town has a lot of them. We kept on going until about 1.6 miles into the ride. We start turning a corner, and my friend 1, who is ahead of us, looks back and says, "Don't look back, just ride as fast as you can." My friend 1 likes to joke with me a lot with stuff like this, so I didn't believe him, and I just stayed at my normal pace, looking around. Then I saw it standing in someone's yard, pale, almost a gray color, skinny with long arms and fingers, just staring at my friends. Then it snapped its head over and looked at me. I was scared shitless as I pedaled as fast as I could till we got back to my friend's house, where we proceeded to lock all the doors and windows and hide. So this happened while I was probably around 15. I was a high school freshman, and I used to walk to school all the time because I never liked the bus, there were too many people, and I'm not very social. So on my way home from school, I was walking my normal path home, which involved going through a graveyard, then up a street leading to a cul-de-sac, which had a path through the woods to my street. I walked it many times, if not regularly. I wasn't really paying attention to my walk up until I had been into the woods about 10 feet. I looked up because something told me to, and I found myself face to face with a tall, shadowy figure. There wasn't anything really identifiable about this thing besides its teeth. There were rows of razor-sharp teeth that formed a smile from ear to ear. It freaked me out so bad that I ran back to the main road and took my chances of being hit by a car, then being in the woods with that thing. I thought that was the end of it all until I got home. I'm an insomniac, so I don't sleep anyway. I've had this issue for quite some time, and while I was dealing with my lack of sleep, I received calls every night at 10 p.m. from an unknown number, and every time I answered, there was nobody on the other end of the phone, just silence. I've come to know this creature that lives in the woods by my house as Mr. Smiley, since that's all I could see or remember from my encounter with him. I live where the witches ran from the Salem witch trials in Massachusetts. Age 12 or so, around 1983, my neighbor friends and I were having a yard camp out in a tent. Around 3-ish, one of the other kids woke up to pee. He immediately woke me and the other kid up. He points down towards his dad's truck, which was about 40 feet from us. It was an early 80s Ford with a cap on the bed. We lived in the country, so there is just one street light about 75 feet behind the truck, by the neighbor's parking spot. Standing beside the back edge of the truck, there was something big and dark. Head as high as the top of the truck cap. It was backlit by the street light, so I could not see facial details. 3/4 of its body was visible, and its left arm was not visible as it was behind the truck. It was stationary but making small fidgety movements. We all saw it. We were all freaking terrified. We had a good long look, as we were sort of frozen with fear. We all just piled back into the tent and did not sleep the rest of the night. After a couple minutes, we heard some brush rustle and the sound of some shifting rocks in the creek bed, then nothing else. Once it was light, we got the courage to leave the tent. We all agreed with what we saw. We went to the truck, and the rear window of the truck cap had a big smear in the dust. It was not an obvious handprint, but it had characteristics that did not rule out handprints and was larger than a paper plate. We had pizza the night before and used a paper plate for comparison. I did not see footprints because of the gravel road. The creek bed had some rocks that seemed disturbed, but nothing that screamed unusual. There are no prints on the opposite bank. We told our dads, and they told us we watched too much TV. Starting off, I would just like to say that this is my first time writing and sharing about an experiences I've had growing up in the woods. You don't have to believe me or any part of my story, but apart from whether you believe me, I know what I saw and experienced was real. Growing up, my brother, T, and I were adopted into a family of 8 around the time I was 4 and T was 6. I would say it was fairly normal, but that couldn't be further from the truth. The family that adopted us lived in the PNW, Pacific Northwest, and they had a property of around 70 acres with nothing but woods around. The cabin they built is quite literally in the middle of the forest. You have to drive for a considerable amount of time, 30 to 40 minutes, to get to the nearest town. On this property, my family built several shop buildings to store wood for the cold seasons and to hold random equipment and machines. These buildings were spread all around the property. Some of them are even older than the cabin my father built, only held together by old, rotting wood and rusted steel. They always seemed to give off ominous vibes. You could oftentimes feel something watching you if you ever went into them alone or even with other people. I give all this context just to give you a personal doorknob. I ran inside my bedroom, slamming the door behind me with such force that it shook my room. I hate when that happens, I said aloud to myself. Referring to the feeling I was just forced to feel. Deciding to try to calm my nerves down a little, I started singing some goofy little tune, not knowing what was going to happen in a few moments. I took off my shirt to put on my nightshirt and then hopped into bed, where I thought I was safe from whatever was peering at me. As I was walking towards my bed, only 2 paces in front of me, there was a snapping pop in midair. Taken aback and, quite frankly, on the verge of sharting my pants, a figure appeared with the pop. Right in front of my eyes stood this being, pitch black, like he was hiding out in a chimney his whole existence. His eyes were void of color or any human emotion or expression. I'm not quite sure how long he and I just stared at each other. It could have been 2 seconds or 10 minutes because it felt like a lifetime. The absolute terror as I looked into these things' eyes ate me up. It was like staring at something you know could kill you in that second but is choosing not to. Something with such emptiness that all that is there is just a void. Feeling as though my soul was being violated, I scrambled to run for the door. Grabbing the door handle, I swung the door open. As I was making my bolt out of the cellar and into the dark, I looked back and saw it staring at me with those empty eyes. I ran with swiftness across the gravel on my bare feet until I got to the back door of the cabin. I ran inside my brother T's room, sobbing and shaking uncontrollably. The first thing he said to me was, "Did you see a ghost or something?" But she quickly came over to comfort me. He still says to this day that he has never seen me or anyone else look so horrified. After he was able to calm me down a little bit, we decided to go tell my parents. They were both devout Christians, with my father bordering on cult status. I told them I saw a demon, and they saw how shook up I was. But quickly, they both denied it, completely dismissing whatever I saw. They never brought it back up to me after that night. My parents were gracious enough to let me sleep in one of our guest rooms for the night, probably because I refused to sleep in my bedroom after that. One night around November, my family and I were eating dinner, and my back was to the kitchen. It sounded like a cutting board fell out of the cabinet behind me, and I didn't think much of it. However, my mom looked over and screamed, so I turned to look and hunched on all fours between the island counter and the counter. I saw a very thin, gray creature. It looked as if its tight, ashen skin was covering the features of its face, including its large mouth. Its face looked almost like this gray skin had grown over its features. It looked like it had arms but was standing on all fours. All the skin on its body was tight and gray. When I think back to it, I don't recall feeling senses of evil, I just feel curious. When I saw the creature, I screamed, jumped over the table, and got ready to throw my glass at it, but when I looked back, it was gone. When my mom asked why I jumped over the table, I told her what I saw. She seemed a little concerned, and she told me she screamed because she saw a mouse, along with everyone else at the table. I don't know why I was the only one who saw what I saw, and I don't know why it didn't stay. I haven't ever seen this again. I have seen shadows and people in my house, along with abnormal smells and footsteps. I have always felt watched in my house, although it doesn't scare me, it just feels like someone or something is watching from the corners of the ceiling. My mom and I both can sense things that my sisters can't, and because of this, my mom does smudge the house every few years. If anyone has any idea what this could have been, please let me know. I would love to hear your ideas, anything would help me get some closure from my experience. This story is 100% true, and I'm writing it on here to warn other people and let them know that there's definitely something out there, and to this day, I still don't know what it was, nor have I gone into any woods or forests, whatsoever. First off, I am a girl, and I live in North Carolina, United States. I was 15 at the time of my encounter and was definitely not a believer in anything supernatural, paranormal, or anything of the sort. It happened while I was at a local summer camp. There was absolutely nothing special about that day, no weird lights, people, animals, sounds, etc. It was just the same camp schedule as I'd grown used to in the past 2 weeks I'd been there. My age group had just finished lunch and was able to persuade our counselor to let us play a game called Scatter down by the lake. It's like a giant hide and seek in the woods. Now we had played this at least 20 times before that day and nothing weird had happened to any of us, and we all grew up playing in the woods, so it's not like we had an aversion or fear of it, but for some reason that day when our counselor shouted scatter, and I ran to find a hiding place, it became a whole new ballgame. I had run as far as I could while still being able to see the lake, as were the rules, and I had found a huge old uprooted tree that I decided would be the perfect hiding place. So I laid down as close as I could against the ground and waited. I had been there for about 5 minutes when I suddenly heard a voice calling my name in a weird dreamy-like voice, and not just any voice, my mom's. Now me and my mom are extremely close, thick as thieves, so I'd know her voice anywhere, and I would swear on my own grave that it was without a doubt hers. But I knew it couldn't be her, she was 20 miles away at work, and even if it had actually been her and she'd come to pick me up early, the voice wasn't coming from the lake, it was coming from further out in the woods beyond the border of the camp. I knew I should have run away from this strange mimic mom voice, but I couldn't. It was almost hypnotic, it messed with my thoughts and gave me doubts like, well, it could be mom. Or what if she's hurt? And I have to get to her. All these things were flooding into my mind like someone had broken a dam I didn't know was there, until they finally overwhelmed me and emotions got the better of me, and I took off running in the direction the voice was coming from. I ran as far as I could with only this strange voice as my guide. I couldn't have run for more than 5 or 7 minutes when I got to a clearing and the voice suddenly stopped. When I entered the clearing and didn't hear my mom's voice calling me anymore, I finally thought clearly again and started to have little alarm bells go off inside my head saying, "You idiot." Or "That's not mom." And run. But I couldn't run, I didn't know where to run. I had gotten so far away that I had lost sight of the lake by camp and had absolutely no idea where I was, and I was completely exhausted to boot. With no other options than to sit and catch my breath, I did just that. No sooner had I sat down, more warning bells went off in my mind. I quickly did a 360-degree survey around the clearing and noticed a strange noise. It wasn't the continuation of the voice before, no, it was the distinct sound of chattering teeth, like if you were cold, only there was no one else around, and it was the middle of June in North Carolina. There's no way someone could be cold. And that's when I heard it, leaves and sticks crunch on the edge of the small clearing, and I realized something was watching me, and then whatever it was moved in fast in circles around the clearing, almost like it was circling prey, and it was at that moment that I knew whatever it was had led me out there away from the rest of my group, exactly like the predator my instincts had been screaming at me that it was. Without any other option other than to try and escape, I took off in the direction I thought I came from and sprinted as fast as I could, all the while hearing the chittering of teeth and sticks crunching behind me. I didn't know what to do, I didn't dare turn around to see what was chasing me. I knew that if I did, it would slow down, and I absolutely would not. It felt like a lifetime running away from this thing before I finally saw the lake, and even though I didn't think I could, I ran faster than I ever have in my life when I broke the tree line and ran to the lake where I knew my friends were. At that point, I felt safe enough to stop and look back and see just what had been chasing me, but when I did, I only saw a fleeting form running back the way I had come and the distinct sound of chittering teeth. When I finally found my counselor, who was the seeker to find all of us, I was hysterical with fear and hugged her as tight as I could. When I finally calmed down, she tried to get me to tell her what happened, but I just asked, "Were you calling my name?" Before she even said anything, I already knew the answer. After all, it had been my mom's voice that led me away from everyone else, but what she replied with was so much more bone-chilling to me. She told me, "No one called for you, we didn't know you were gone. Everyone is still hiding, the game isn't over yet." I may seem out of my mind, but I feel like I am. The first night I heard it was the end of the summer of 2019. I was building my own art studio in the back of this old building. One night, I stepped out onto the back deck to clean up. I was staring off into the woods that ran right up next to the stairs leading up to my studio. I heard something let loose this immense, deep howling off in the distance. It had such a blood-curdling effect on the air around me that it gave me goosebumps and raised every hair on my body. And shortly after it went silent, I heard all the dogs in a 1 or 2 mile radius barking, yipping, and howling in the direction of that roar or howl. There's no way it was a wolf or any large cat. I've heard videos and sound bites of wildcats and mountain cats making those demonic type sounds, and that wasn't this. This was the roar of a human-animal mix. I could hear it in its voice. The area of Ohio I'm in isn't a place where you'd see or hear a large cat, let alone one. My first thought was, that's the Wendigo coming to get me. And I don't know why that popped in my head like that, and a countless other number of things have been happening more and more, almost like intuition or something in my head. 4 weeks prior to the weirdest shit I've ever experienced. I was approached by a man about commissioning 3 art pieces of something I wasn't familiar with at all. Wendigos. More specifically, a wartime Wendigo where it's this huge, 1,000-foot tall creature, taller than a building or skyscraper, and it's made out of all of us, with body parts sticking out all over it and a face here and there. It was supposed to represent all of our greed and insatiable desire for more. Sadly, I didn't have the time to work on these pieces, so I passed. But it started reminding me of my own monster that's been following me my whole life. I made some drawings of a dream or night terror I had a week before this man approached me to turn us into the Wendigo. In my dream, it was a tall, emaciated creature with an animal-like body, legs, and human-like arms crouching in my kitchen like a dog would sit looking in my cabinets. "What the hell are you doing, dude?" I asked for it. "Chill the duck out, I'm looking for some chips or something, I'm starving," it replied. I sat up quickly and threw the blanket off me because I didn't say that out loud. It turned to look at me, and the way it looked was indescribable, but I took in every detail I could. It had large black holes where the eyes were supposed to be and just a jagged slit across the lower side of its face that represented a mouth with no lips. And thousands of rows of jagged teeth curled around its gums, with a long tongue sliding out between them. It let out a gurgled, squelching scream. Then all of a sudden black smoky tendrils shot out where its hair was supposed to be on its head, lingered for a second, and sucked back in towards its body, then boom. It vanished. I made drawings of it as soon as I woke up, and I was trying to put the pieces together as to why it's in our kitchen. And very hair on my body stood on end, because I had an unanswered email still about commissioning some artwork based on it. Fast forward to June 2020. Corona has taken over the world. And I'm sure I've lost my mind. I forgot all about it and I'm hanging out with a friend at 3 a.m. after months of not seeing or talking to anyone, it seemed. We went out to White Castle for a quick bite. She walks out first and hits the bottom step as I'm walking out and locking the door. I hear something breaking tree limbs and crashing through them. Not fast, but not slow, and definitely noticeable. And it was coming from up high and gradually getting louder as it neared us and as it got lower. It reminded me of an orangutan or gorilla in the way it swung from each branch, and I could hear its hands gripping each one and snapping smaller limbs in its way. It was coming in our direction. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I'm crazy, until she turned around quick and was looking up high in the trees. She asked me, "Do you hear that?" I turned white and felt the air get heavier from the fear that was emanating from this thing. As I came down the stairs, she was staring into the trees, looking upwards. I glanced and saw branches moving. I yelled at her to get out of here quickly, pulling her in the direction of the car. We turned our backs to the woods when this loud thwack occurred. It landed just behind me, and all the hairs on my body stood straight up. I felt like it had a log or large, thick branch in its hand and smacked the ground with it. I stood paralyzed with fear. The air was thicker and different when whatever it was landed directly behind me. I could feel the force of it, and it brought tears to my eyes. It was the weirdest feeling to have come over me and feel like it's crushing every inch of my body without touching me. And to hurt so badly, it brought tears to my eyes and made me shake uncontrollably. And the fear it made me feel was too much to bear. Hands down one of the scariest moments I've ever encountered. I couldn't shake it. So we went to White Castles and were both shook to our cores. I'm in disbelief at what we just witnessed. We came back, turned the lights on in her car, and let them light up the woods for a good 20 minutes before we felt it was safe to go back inside. The only weapon I had in sight was a golf club. She told me she had seen it high in the trees and that it looked almost like an owl-like creature with weird features. But later on, she told me a story from when she was a teenager. She thought she was going to get taken off the back of a motorcycle by a huge owl swooping down towards her. And I told a friend about this a few months later and somehow remembered that whatever these things are, they feed off of fear. I don't know where I remember this from or why these thoughts randomly pop into my head. It's almost like something else is telling me. Since then, there's been a whole lot more weird stuff that's happened. Date, late October 2002. Location, Junín, Argentina. Time, night. Summary, several locals reported seeing a strange dwarf-like creature and notified the police department. First, a man heard consistent knocking at the front door, and looking out, he saw a small, man-like figure that requested assistance, saying that one of his family members was being beaten. Briefly stepping out, the witness did not hear any shouts or voices and did not see anything amiss. Meanwhile, the little man disappeared into the darkness. Fearing a robbery, the witness ran back inside. Hours later, a similar figure was seen walking on Juan Manuel de Rosas Boulevard. The police responded but found nothing. Days later, a local police officer responding to the dog's constant barking went out to investigate and confronted a figure about 80 centimeters in stature that was standing at the entrance to his house. When the creature noticed that it was being observed, it quickly left the area. The officer described the figure as about 80 centimeters in height, man-like, with a beard and long, pointy ears. So 13 or 14 years ago, when I was probably 8 or 9, I was at my aunt's house for Christmas Eve. I was in the living room, sitting on the floor. I don't remember what I was doing, probably just playing. I was sitting by the back door. The main door was open, so I could see out the screen door. On that side of the house, there was a tree line with a creek behind it. I don't know why, but I looked out the screen door, and I saw a white thing run across the door towards the trees. So it was kind of at an angle to the direction it was running. It was over in 3 seconds. All I could see was the back of it and from the waist up. It had the same build as a human from what I could tell, but it was all white and completely bald, and I caught a strong scent of skunk right as this happened. It scared the crap out of me. I told my mom, but you know how that goes. I was close to her for the rest of the visit there. I was never completely sure if I actually saw what I saw, but years later I found out about the Rake. But is it just something made up on the internet? So how could I have seen one? And I think I've read somewhere that they smell like skunks. This is in Oklahoma, by the way, and it was in the middle of the day. Every other story I've heard of these things is late at night. What do you guys think? Was I just a little kid with an overactive imagination, or what? It is 100% true, and it did give me the chills and has left me perplexed to this day. It does take place near a thicket of dense trees and abandoned, overgrown brush fields. This took place about a year ago, more accurately, in October or November of last year, near my home in Michigan. For reference, I'm about an hour away from Detroit. A used-to-be small town that's become more densely populated over the last decade, with a lot more hustle and bustle. However, where I live, I'm at least 1 mile away in all directions from any commercial zones or more modernized residential areas that tend to be a bit congested. It's one of the last stretches of slow, old farm country in the town that hasn't been overrun with cookie-cutter subdivisions. My house was built in the 1970s by my grandfather, with whom I still reside. So, it's an autumn Sunday evening, and the sun has been down for a bit. Most of the leaves had fallen by now, but I recall it being an unusually warm night for that time of year. Everyone in my house was winding down for the night and preparing for the work/school week. I'd say around 10:30, I decide to let my dogs out one last time before turning in for the night. I go to open our back door, which is a giant glass sliding door wall window, and my dogs are right at my feet behind me, ready to bust out of the door as soon as it opens wide enough. I'm glad I didn't let them out because I guarantee if they saw what I briefly did, they would have both charged toward it, and it would have just been bad news. I open the door, and where the edge of our yard ends and the brushy field begins, a pale, grayish figure stands amidst the brush at the edge of the yard. The only reason I noticed it in the first place was because the noise my door made seemed to have startled it, so it made noise in the dry, fallen leaves, which then caused me to direct my attention towards this noise. Which is when I saw it, fleetingly, duck down and take off further into the field behind my house. It's difficult to describe, but due to what I saw, being familiar with coyotes, feral cats, and other animals I'm used to seeing around the property, it had remarkably human characteristics, given its height and how it crouched over before moving in bound-like strides into the field. Another thing I noticed was that it didn't make the sound of what a human, or any animal that is native to this area, for that matter, would make in retreat. The pace wasn't quick, it took multiple steps like a human, deer, or coyote. They were like long, bounding strides. And the sound it made hitting the ground had weight to it. The tread was not light, I guess, which is what I'm trying to say. It sounded big, it kind of took my breath away, and I was left startled myself, but due to what I did see, believing what I saw to bear resemblance to a human, I sheepishly called out, "Hello? Is someone out here?" I'm still standing in my doorway, kind of frozen in mild fear. I yell again, "Hello?" This time, he was a bit more confident and enunciated. This captures the attention of my husband and my aunt. My husband came downstairs to see why I was yelling outside, as did my aunt. I explained to both of them, kind of frantically, what I had just witnessed. My aunt was spooked, and my husband went upstairs to get a flashlight and his air rifle. I am an animal lover, and I don't like the idea of him shooting any animals, even problem animals, with something that can do serious damage like aerial gun, so he uses an air rifle, but it can still wound and kill small game, like a raccoon. My husband and I both go outside into the backyard. With his rifle and light, we begin scanning a pitch black, overgrown field, to no avail at first. Maybe after 5 minutes of looking, my husband hops on top of his sedan that's parked outside to get a better view of the field or any movement through the brush and continues looking. His gaze stops in one particular direction, though. He hops down, quietly approaches me in the yard, and points in the direction of what he was looking at. About 20 yards into the field, in the direction closer toward the back of my neighbor's property, there are two glowing orange-red eyes looking right at us through the brush. Somewhat low to the ground. When he gets me to see what he's seeing, he decides to shoot in the general direction of this thing to maybe startle it a bit and see how it moves. He did this several times, and it didn't flinch. Then he decided he would try to aim his fire directly at it to get a reaction, and he's got a damn good shot. He hits it in what I imagine to be the face, and it sort of jumps up, and when it landed, it was a solid sounding thud against the ground. All the while, it did not break its gaze on us. After hitting the ground, it moved further back into the field without running away necessarily. It kept eye contact with us the entire time. It was almost as if it were walking backward, not once averting its gaze. It eventually moved far enough back that we both had to jump onto the car to still be able to see it. After several minutes of this, it had moved beyond our visual, so we hopped down and went inside. It's worth mentioning that there wasn't any sort of light that would cause reflective eyes, aside from the moon, which wasn't even full and was very dark. We purposefully kept our lights off, and the eyes looked as though they weren't even reflecting light but rather emitting it. Do with this what you will, but I and my husband both know what we saw, and given the frequency and variety of animals we see normally, this was significantly different than what we see. We have deer, coyotes, foxes, possums, raccoons, skunks, and feral cats, all of which we are very familiar with. We have not seen anything like this prior to or since this time. Although we do hear strange sounds and noises in the field and the woods from time to time at night, my husband has actually woken me up in the middle of the night to listen to some strange moans and wailing, but that hasn't happened since earlier this year. Orange-eyed black creature. The creature is a tall and inky black-colored humanoid creature. Its legs have two joints like those of a dinosaur's legs. It seems to lack arms but has visible shoulders, but its most noticeable and iconic feature is that of its two orange glowing eyes. In almost all of the reports, it seems that the creature is light absorbent, as when a light is flashed towards the creature, the light does not shine on its body. Its behavior is somewhat like that of a distant and ominous stalker. In reports, it's been seen alone, in pairs, and in groups just standing far away, constantly watching and standing completely still as if it's being observed. They're intrigued by our existence and are studying us and our every move. But the weirdest thing that's been reported is that once you are on the verge of being out of sight or you're getting too close to the creature, it just seems to fade into nothingness and disappear, almost as if it's becoming invisible to the eye. Possibly because of its incredible black and non-light reflecting skin, it can just close its eyes and disappear into the darkness, but with this assumption comes the scary thought that these creatures are not visible to the naked eye during the day since light does not bounce off their bodies and into your eyes. They're basically invisible other than their piercing orange glowing eyes. It was September 28, 2015, in rural southeast Oklahoma. It was a harvest moon that year, and the moon was full and glowing with a dull orange glow. I was young, and since I was not told why the moon was glowing orange, I was afraid. My dad, being the best dad in the world, decided that the best way to cure my fear was to drive me out into our pasture and go spotlighting. It was not, but about 6 minutes into our drive, I noticed about 4 to 5 glowing eyes near the tree line. I told my dad to point the spotlight over there, but when he did, there was nothing there. Just black night. My dad played it off as coyotes just laying out of sight because he knew I was already at it and went on with their walk, and suddenly I felt like I was being watched. I couldn't tell anything with all the snow on the trees and the fact that there's no snow that fell from them either. So, like a dumbass, I ignored it and went on. I went out the other side of the forest and headed up a hill that leads to a road that leads to the end of the golf course. I felt the feeling of being watched again, turned around on instinct, and saw it. It was a pale white figure standing in the tree. I'm a person who always believed in the supernatural and enjoyed studying it, and I knew what that thing was. It was a Wendigo, and I knew I needed to get out of there. For those who don't know, a Wendigo is a mythical creature that is believed in Native American folklore. It's believed that it's a carnivorous monster that never stops eating. Back to the story, I ran as fast as I could with the dogs across the street, and they started to chase me. I almost got hit by an oncoming van, and it stopped and looked at what I was running from. I immediately got back in his van and drove off faster than he had before. While he was distracted, I ran as fast as I could, and like a dumbass, I ran back to my home. Once I got home, I acted as naturally as I could, went to my room, and tried my best to calm down. By dinner, I had calmed down and ate dinner. Once it came to going to bed, that's when it started to get creepy. To explain the layout of where I am in the house, my room is right below the roof and has another small roof that is above the front porch, which is right outside my window. Back to the story, I shut my blinds and got ready for bed, but then I heard footsteps on my roof, followed by a small thump right outside my window. I saw the silhouette of it. That ducker was hunched over, looking in my window as if he could see me. I was terrified by this and couldn't sleep at all. I couldn't even breathe. It stood there for what felt like eternity, which was only about 2 hours. After that time had passed, he gave up after letting out a scream. It was like a mix of the alien scream and a cat getting skinned alive, or the scream from a Wendigo from the video game Until Dawn. My parents wondered what was going on, and I made up some bullshit excuse. They believed me and headed back to bed. There was no need to get them into this, and it's not like they'll believe me anyway. My dumbass didn't take a picture or video. That wasn't the end of it. This happened every week for about 2 months, then turned to every other day, every week, and every month. Nowadays I don't see it much, but I see him every now and then. I still go to that area even to this day, and I even found a skinwalker there, but that's a story for another day. If you ever run into a Wendigo, run as fast as you can and as far away as you can. I don't care if you have to run to a new city, duck, I don't care if you have to leave the state, just run so far away that you lose that ducker. Or the same events that happened to me may happen to you. If you have any information about how to kill this ducker, leave it in the comments. I've already tried holy water, and it didn't work. I put that shit all over the roof outside my window, and the ducker was standing on it like it was nothing. Be careful, sometimes, while searching for monsters, they'll end up finding you. I am a 15-year-old female. I'm from Nebraska. I know you are probably thinking cornfields, middle of nowhere, but that's not where I'm from. I live in Omaha. But I have always loved the outdoors. I go hunting and hiking almost every weekend with my dad or with friends. Okay, on to the story. This story is 100% true. I went to Nebraska National Forest every long weekend with 2 friends, whom I will call Hallie and Todd. I have known them for years, and we would never hike alone because of the risks. So we became a group. Anyway, it was spring break last year when we went on a week-long backpacking trip. It was a 7-hour drive there. I, being 14, couldn't drive, but Hallie was 16 and to 15. Hallie drove us there, and we had a great time for the first few hours of the drive. But when we go closer to the forest, something feels off. I know it sounds cliché, but I had this feeling like I was going to get sick. I ignored it and thought I was just nervous. So Hallie and Todd, I guess, noticed that I was off. They asked me what was up, and when I told them something wasn't right, they laughed, thinking I was trying to scare them. A few hours later, the feeling was still there, but we were at the trailhead. I got out, and everything was as it should be. We grabbed our packs, and off we went. I felt like I was at home in the trees, and the feeling was soon forgotten. We walked a little over 5 miles that day before we set up camp. We had a 2-person tent that Hallie and I had brought, and then a hammock that Todd had bought. After we set up camp, we ate and were just chilling by the fire talking. There wasn't any alcohol or drugs. Todd began complaining about how he didn't want to sleep in his hammock. I didn't want to listen to him complain, so I offered to switch places. He gladly accepted. So the night went on like usual until around 2 a.m., when we all got tired and went to bed. Well, everyone but me. I have extremely bad insomnia, so I was just mending the fire and chilling. Finally, I decided to get into the hammock and read. So I put out the fire, garbed my headlamp, and got into the hammock. I noticed that something was off, but I couldn't place what it was. That's when it hit me, it was completely silent in the woods. No crickets, no animals, nothing. My skin started to crawl, something was off. I turned out my headlamp, laid down, and kept silent. I wanted to try and hear some type of animal to ease my worries. That's when I heard it, something was dragging against the tent. I wasn't even 5 feet from the tent. It freaked me out, and I did something really stupid. I called out my friends' names. The noise stopped. I got no answer, but this feeling of dread was something I hadn't felt before or since. That's when I felt it. Something poked the hammock. It wasn't like a soft poke, it was like a jab. I was horrified. What the hell had just touched me, and where the hell was it? I was frozen. I also suffer from anxiety, and I felt the panic rising in me. I couldn't understand what was going on. That's when I made another mistake. I decided I wanted to see what had just jabbed me. All this happened within seconds. I reached up and clicked on my light. That's when I saw it. It was one of my nightmares. There was a creature about 4 feet above me staring at me, kind of hunched over. I was about 3 feet off the ground, so this thing was probably 7 to 8 feet tall. It looked like a dog, but it also didn't. It had the face of a wolf, but human in a way. The eyes looked red, the ears looked like clipped pit bull ears, its mouth pulled back in a snarl, and a hand, claw, and paw thing blocked its face. I was terrified. Its teeth were huge and sharp, and the paws, if you could even call them that hand, were 5-finger type things with sharp, long claws that looked like they could tear me apart. I stared at this thing for what felt like hours, but it was probably only 5 seconds. That's when I screamed bloody murder. As soon as I did that, this thing let out something between a scream and a howl. It was deep, and I could feel it. When I heard Todd yell, "What the hell was that?" I heard the tent opening, and that's when the creature and I finally broke eye contact. I yelled at Hallie and Todd to help me. I looked back up, and this thing was climbing the fricking tree. It was still staring at me. That's when I saw the back of it. It had the tail of a dog, grayish silver fur, a black mane down its back, and a hump. I took this opportunity to scramble out of my hammock. We took off without grabbing anything. I had no shoes, nothing. We made it to the car. But the whole time back, I heard something in the trees. The next day, we had park rangers go get our things because we were freaked out. When they got there, everything was gone. Not even trash remained. It was as if we were never there. They blamed us for lying. We had no idea what had happened. I had no idea what I saw or why it didn't just kill me. I haven't been back in the woods for a very long time, but still, every time I close my eyes, I see that thing and hear its roar. I'm from Canada, and I live on a reserve that's about 30 minutes from any town, which is relatively close compared to other places I've been. Well, it's the end of December, and we're just getting finished with the holidays and spending them relatively alone. I get a call from one of my friends saying he wants to go hunting. Well, that's kind of a problem because I've never shot a gun or gone hunting before. Pretty pathetic for a Native American if you ask me, but anyway, he tells me he just needs my eyes and another set of legs to help carry whatever he catches. So I agree that this is one of the biggest mistakes I will regret. So he picks me up in his crappy old Ford truck, which he uses for hunting, and tells me we are going deep into the bush and will find a spot to camp along the way. So we drive about 20 minutes into the woods, following what little road is left, and we get to a point where we have to continue on foot. We unload our gear and supplies and carry them till we find a nice clearing with room for everything after. After we set up camp, we begin our trek into the woods, going farther than I had gone before. We saw a couple of bucks and rabbits, nothing spectacular, so we keep looking because he wants the big daddy buck, and we come to this other clearing, much larger than the one we are camping at, and something about this part of the woods just feels off. It had a heavy feeling, like the air was thick, and it just had a disorienting aura about this place. But we hadn't caught anything yet, and we're getting hungry, so we spot a rabbit in the middle of this clearing. Buddy lines up the shot, and bam, we have dinner. Being the one without the gun, I go to get our little dinner in the middle of this clearing, and I notice something odd. It's a perfect circle, no tree stumps, no sign that any human has made this gigantic circle. I also happen to notice what looked like claw marks on the trees surrounding the area. Buddy said it's from bears sharpening their claws and marking territory, but the marks were so deep into the trees that they seemed off. Anyway, it's dark out now, and we are back at our campsite, eating and talking about how crazy this pandemic shit is. I also brought up the clearing we were at and how weird it felt to me. I wanted to know if he felt like that too or if I was just exaggerating. My anxiety makes me do that sometimes. To which he said, yeah. He also noticed the change in the air and said it made him feel dizzy and worn out, but he also said it just could have been from the long day we had, so on that note, it was time for bed. We both slept in the same tent. It's the middle of winter and bundling up can only do so much, plus he was like a brother to me, so not a big deal. It had to be around 1 a.m. when we both woke up to the sound of the most horrible scream I'd ever heard. What the duck was that? Was my first thought. I'm guessing my friend was thinking the same thing as he looked at me with fear on his face. I know because I was afraid too. So he grabs his gun and loads a round, and we just sit there for a while and listen. Now I know my friend is at least safe. He has a gun, but I have nothing. Fear and my anxiety start getting the better of me, so I ask, where's the hatchet we used to split wood? Out there by the fire, he says. So I tell him I'm going to open the tent, grab the hatchet, and when I jump in, you seal the thing back up. I open the tent and, as fast as I can, bolt out to grab that hatchet. As I go to turn around with the hatchet in hand, I'm quickly greeted by my friend shoving me down by the back of my neck. He puts his finger up to his mouth to tell me to be quiet, and we listen. In the distance, I can hear the slow sound of crunching snow and a faint, high-pitched guttural growl. Now I'm in full panic mode. We don't even have to say anything to each other because we both know our hunting trip was over and it was time to leave. All we had to do was make it to the truck. In the dead of night, it sounded so easy. But it wasn't, and I knew that from the moment my friend said, I'm going to fire a warning shot, but before I could even open my mouth to tell him, no, it was too late. The shot rang in the distance, and for a moment, there was silence. Then we heard it, a scream so soul-piercing it felt like it lasted forever. It definitely echoed much further than this gunshot did. It was petrifying. I'd never heard such a haunting scream before, and I was literally frozen in fear. Then we could hear whatever made this scream charge right for us, with the sound of crunching snow getting closer and closer. We looked at each other and just ran in the direction of the truck, frantically sprinting and calling out to each other to make sure the other hadn't fallen behind. We're almost there, we kept telling each other as we were weaving through trees and making a beeline to the truck, trying to ignore the sound of this growl that sounds like it's right in my ear, but I can see the truck is going to make it. We're getting out of here. As we come up to the truck, my friend makes it to his side and unlocks both the passenger and driver sides at the same time. As I open the door, he does so at the same time, and then he's gone in a flash of white. This thing had gotten him and ran at him with such force that when it tackled him, it shook the truck side to side. I stood there in shock. I called out to him, but all I could hear were screams, a couple gunshots, and then dead silence again. I know in my heart that my friend is dead, and so am I if I don't get the duck out of here. I go over to the driver's side and find the keys on the ground. He must have let them go when he got tackled. I hop in, start the damn thing, whip it around in the direction I need to get out of here, and then I see it. Skin as white as snow, completely hairless, eyes that had sunken into its head made dark circles around eyes that were just as white as its skin, no nose, teeth so jagged and sharp that they shined with the color of blood, and its lips looked like they had been chewed off, so all you were staring at were its teeth. Its body was so disproportioned but had long, lanky limbs. This thing is blocking me from leaving, but I'm getting out of here no matter what. I floored it with the tires spinning. I shoot forward, and so does it, screaming that blood-curdling scream as it charges at me. Now I'm getting up close and personal as this thing lunges at the truck and bounces off the hood and over top of the truck. As I was speeding away, I glanced at the rear view mirror and witnessed this thing get up and just stand there, watching me drive off with its head tilted slightly. I knew I had just escaped death at the price of losing my friend.